Hello everybody. So this video is going to review some of the things that we're asking people to do as they fill out their assessment of student learning reports at the end of the academic year of 2020-2021. The reason why we need to do this is because, of course, the Higher Learning Commission is going to do their audit soon, and one of the most challenging parts of the assessment, or that overall review, is criterion 4B of the many criteria that they have for us. And criterion 4B gauges whether the institution has effective processes for assessment of student learning and for achievement of learning goals in academic and co-curricular offerings. That's item 1 of criterion 4B. Item 2, the institution uses the information gained from assessment to improve student learning. And then the third part of criterion 4B, that the institution's processes and methodologies to assess student learning reflect good practice, including the substantial participation of faculty, instructional, and other relevant staff members. Of course, that's where all of us come in as we assess student learning. This video focuses on the use of information, right? This is something that we've been trying to kind of hammer out, and I know there have been various forms of communication that we've offered related to that, but really we're asking and we're trying to show the HLC how we measure students' achievement of learning. You remember this chart that we had that everybody needed to do, all of the programs needed to do, and the purpose of this chart, you'll remember, was just to correlate each of our program learning outcomes, which you see in the left column, with at least one of the institutional learning outcomes, which you see in the very top row. And you'll notice that the program that you're filling this chart out for would be listed in the upper left corner, and also the external field that provides guidelines that might direct your learning outcomes as well. That also needed to be placed in the chart. This is also something that's connected with the HLC's standards. So, and you'll remember this exercise that we did where, you might say that that learning outcome 3, whatever it is, corresponds to this particular institutional learning outcome, and so on and so forth, right? And let's say, for example, this is all very hypothetical, and let's say, remember, you maybe had these covered, but then there might have been one missing institutional learning outcome that you didn't have a specific program learning outcome that corresponded to, and so you just kind of needed to maybe adjust your program learning outcomes so that there was something that ended up corresponding to maybe one of the final institutional learning outcomes that might not have been covered, or at least the coverage of which was not directly pronounced by a particular program learning outcome. So just to remind you of this chart and to remind you about the value of the learning outcomes as they relate to our institution. That's the basic idea of this. So now over to the chart that you have in front of you. Just to kind of clarify the different columns, the columns on the left, 3 columns on the left, these are going to be fixed. They're really not going to be things that we change from one year to the next. They are the student learning outcomes of your program or department. They are the courses in which are found some of the artifacts by which you measure student learning. And then, of course, the third column is those specific metrics. Those are going to be consistent from year to year. The ones on the right, the data, that's going to change from one year to the next because the data is going to report the results from the assessment. And, of course, the final column on continuous improvement, of course, that one is also going to be updated from one year to the next because it has to do with, based on your results, based on your data, what are some of the things that you could focus on for the following year? Now, all of this, obviously, I've put in some sample information in these columns, which kind of roughly represents something that one of your reports may look like or may start to look like, considering you've already started to work on this. Right? So just going to review column by column. The learning outcomes column, right? What is this doing? What this doing is it's listing all of the student learning outcomes that your department or program has for the students, the expectations. You might remember we did this exercise where we had a matrix where we had to align each learning outcome to at least one institutional outcome, right? So that way there is some kind of cohesiveness between all of the programs together, and then of course the individual student learning outcomes for each program. We don't need to repeat that exercise, but it's certainly something that remains relevant and helps to shed light on why we have these SLOs student learning outcomes delineated here. The learning outcomes, once again, and as a reminder, they should be based on or should draw from the guidelines of some kind of major external academic or professional group related to your program. So almost every subject has some kind of external body that usually they host conferences and so forth, and they usually publish some kind of standard for what learning outcomes should be affiliated with your program. So make sure that all of those are listed. All student learning outcomes need to be in that left column. Courses. So what the courses list is, it just names where the assessment is done, in which course the assessment is done. It is the case that students in every program improve in every learning outcome every year. It might be the case that each outcomes assessment will be applied in a specific course. Some programs run certain courses periodically, maybe once a year, or sometimes, every 2 years, right? Of course, that is completely understandable, but there needs to be at least one assessment per year. So regardless of what courses are offered on any given year or in any given semester, there's got to be at least one assessment that is done. Please ensure that every year there's at least one course with an assessment tool that is offered. It doesn't have to be the same course, but there does need to be some kind of assessment every year. You may need to designate for an assessment an artifact that already exists. So in other words, if you don't have a tool for an assessment this year, look for one, perhaps in a project or some kind of assignment that is done by students in a course at least every year. Later on, just to go back into this, later on, there is I've got a little kind of a graphic or a visualization of what it could look like if you've got courses that you offer only every so often, and those are the ones that happen to have assessments in them. I give a little bit of a sample of a visualization towards the end of the video. So there will be a stopping point later on, in which case you could sort of pause or just completely shut down the video, but then after that, think of it as a bit of an appendix, which may help you kind of work through some of this. All right, the middle column, the metric. This is where you actually identify what tool you are using to assess student learning. So it could be a thesis paper, some sort of research paper in one of the classes. It could be a presentation that students have to do. If one of your learning outcomes has to do with kind of orally articulating something, then a presentation might be a good artifact that will demonstrate, that will measure that learning outcome. Or it could be an exam. It could be many different kinds of things, lots of different sorts of assignments or tasks that you have the students do, as long as there is some kind of quantitative measurement. Now you can have qualitative assignments as well, but there needs to be, when you're reporting the data, there needs to be something that is an absolute number. And that's the way that we're actually going to, first of all, meet the Higher Learning Commission's criteria, and second of all, how we're going to be able to much more precisely gauge how we've been doing from one year to the next, right? All right, so artifacts, as I mentioned, include papers, presentations, exams, portfolios is another possibility. Again, the scores and measurements need to be numerical. If you do have an assignment that doesn't happen to be directly numerical, rubrics are very helpful for that. Rubrics can translate the qualitative into the quantitative with great ease and great precision, and in a way that communicates your expectations to the students very well. Let us know. I love to use rubrics a lot. I think Lynn does as well. And so if you are interested in using me as a sounding board for some rubric ideas, very happy to do that. There are lots of other resources that we can make available to you as well. All right, the next column, the actual data. Now this is what you're going to end up reporting by June, when this whole report is due. What exactly are the numerical results of the assessments that you've done, right? The artifacts. All right. N here refers to the number of students, right? So you may have 2 students in a class, you may have 3, you may have 11, you may have 15. That's N is the number of students. M is the mean, the average. R is the range. You don't necessarily have to include all of these items in there, although it would be certainly recommended. It would be very helpful. The important thing is that you enter meaningful quantitative data. Quantitative data that can be compared with future reports to gain a general over time view of progress in student learning. All right, very, very important, and that's what will placate the HLC. Final column. Okay, now here's where we're going from measuring to thinking about improving. So based on the data, identify at least one learning outcome on which your program or department will focus on for improvement over the next academic year. And it only has to be one. You only have to identify one area of improvement every year. It's not acceptable to have no ideas for improvement. You can't simply say, well, everything seems to be, expectations have been met, so not really any room for improvement. The HLC will have a problem with that. We need to show that we are interested in continuously improving, right? So make sure that you've got something in that column. When you're done with your assessment report, please go ahead and submit it to Mary. Here's her email address. I'm sure you all already have it. Very easy to complete. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact myself or Lynn, and our contact information is there. Our emails are there. And coming up on 10 minutes. So if you want to finish the video and close it down here, that's fine. Otherwise, proceed, and I've got a little bit more content that sheds a little bit of light on what we're doing. And here we go. I want to share this cautionary tale. John Carroll University, as I'm sure many of you know, they were kind of put on notice. And one of the reasons why they were put on notice in 2015, now they recovered from it. They were able to kind of come back and meet the request of the Higher Learning Commission, meet their expectations. They were able to do that fairly quickly. However, they were put on notice. One of the reasons why was because they were, as this is directly from the Higher Learning Commission's letter to the president of John Carroll University, where they say the university is at risk of being out of compliance with criterion 4, core component 4B. Now there were other criteria that they were at risk of being out of compliance as well, but of course, since we're talking about assessment of student learning in this video, wanted to focus on that that 4B. Quote, the institution demonstrates a commitment to educational achievement and improvement through ongoing assessment of student learning. Again, it's quoting 4B, which is what I had started this video by talking about. All right, so here are some of the bullet points from the HLC's letter that are worth reviewing and looking at. These are the problems that the HLC had with John Carroll University and their attempts to, or their risk of not meeting the criteria for this. I want to highlight two of them. One of them, they say, faculty had not been fully engaged in the assessment process, with less than half of the full-time faculty engaging in committee work in 2010 or 2012. And we have obviously, the fact that you are watching this video now and the fact that you've been filling these reports, and we've been doing a lot of work on this, shows our effort to make sure that our faculty are fully engaged in this process. Very important, right? So we are tackling that. Also, John Carroll University had not yet shown evidence of a mature assessment system operating on a regular basis to inform decision making and contribute to ongoing improvement of the curricula as required by this core component, right? So this is one of the things that we are doing. We are in the process of doing this. We're making sure that we are making our assessment system mature, robust, consistent, and longitudinal. And I know, this does not come out of a vacuum. Mary Jo had been working on this for a while, and we are just kind of moving upward and onward, and we're trying to be better than ever, and we want to make sure that we show the Higher Learning Commission that we're doing a great job of all of this. All right, so now I also promised earlier in the video that I would show you a little bit of a visualization of what it could look like if you've got courses that are not offered every semester, or maybe even not offered every year, and how you might kind of work out your assessment of student learning table based on those difficulties, or those logistical challenges. So let's say on the left, I've got a sample 2-year cycle of, say, different courses, right? Now these are all made up numbers. You see in the upper left, course 103, course 122, course 103, course 128. So that means that course 103 is offered every fall, say. This is all, suppositional. And then, so there are other ones. And notice in the lower right, there's the capstone course of whatever this curriculum is, C490. Okay, so let's say, and notice, in the right column, you've got something that looks very similar to the table that you've been filling out for your assessment. So you've got your learning outcomes in the left column, right? So learning outcome 1, learning outcome 2, whatever those are. And then the metric that would be used maybe to measure that kind of thing. So if there's a learning outcome that has to do with critical thinking in reading the literature, whether the literature is scientific or whether it's more rhetorical or whether it's fiction or so forth, some sort of metric, some kind of essay maybe that a student has to do that does that measures that learning outcome. Let's call that M1, measures learning outcome 1. M2 is whatever metric or assignment or project measures learning outcome 2, and so forth. M3, learning outcome 3, and so forth, right? Okay, so let's say, hypothetically, oh yeah, metrics correspond to student learning outcomes. Let's say that there is an assignment in C103 which assesses the student's ability, assesses their learning in learning outcome 1, right? Okay, great. Well, then all you have to do is name that course and corresponding to metric 1, right? Piece of cake. Let's say course 331. It has an assignment or has some kind of task for the students that measures learning outcome number 2. Well, then you can put it in that space there. Okay, now I'm gonna make it so that at least off the bat that there is not a course offered in the second year, in year B of this 2-year cycle, that that offers an assessment for 2, right? So we'll see how that looks in the end. So let's say metric 3 is conducted in C220 and notice C225 in the lower left. Let's say both of those courses, they happen to have assignments that measure learning outcome 3. Well, you can put those there, right? And then let's say, notice course 128. Let's say it has some sort of assignment or task or some sort of portfolio, or there's some sort of exam that measures learning outcome 4, right? Then you might list that course there and so forth. Let's say your capstone measures learning outcome 5, right? Then of course you put the capstone there. Okay, now notice every year there are things that are measured, right? There is some kind of assessment that occurs every year, and metrics specifying that these are numerical ways, they're quantitative ways of assessing student learning. All right, now this is great. This will satisfy the Higher Learning Commission. But of course, it's not quite ideal. The reason why it's not quite ideal is because not every learning outcome is being measured every year. So it's not quite ideal. However, it's sufficient, right? Now, ideally, if we were going to talk about the ideal situation, notice I've just simply duplicated the same graph on the right now. But here, we're going to take some efforts to try and either identify or plant certain kinds of assignments or tasks or artifacts in maybe some additional classes that will provide your curriculum, your department, your program with a way of measuring every metric every year, right? Every learning outcome every year. I'm sorry, not measuring every metric, but measuring every student learning outcome. So let's say and what has just appeared, and sorry, it's a bit subtle, I chose fade. For course 322, I'm sorry, for course 122, which occurs in spring A of year A. Well, notice, let's say that we say, okay, whenever we offer 122, let's make sure that we have some kind of assignment that measures learning outcome 4. Okay, well now you've got a course every year, offered every year, that offers learning outcome 4. So notice on the right in that column, learning outcome 4, now you've got courses 122 and 128 that in which that sort of metric appears, right? And let's say, notice you also need in spring B, course 337, let's say you find that can use, that has a metric too, right? That's something that can measure learning outcome too. Well, now on the right, you can put that course as well. Courses 331 and course 337 and so forth. All right, now notice what remains is learning outcome 5 is measured only every other year. Well, perhaps we could, in course 339, have some kind of task or assignment that also measures learning outcome 5. So in course 339, which is offered in year A, let's say we can have that there. Well, now in the far right column, which is again sort of the ideal situation, we can say in course 339 and in course 490 there is some kind of way of measuring learning outcome 5. And this is, yeah, again, the ideal situation, right? It's not entirely necessary to have all of these, to have everything measured every year. Although that certainly is our goal. We want to be able to measure every learning outcome every year. So if you are able to approach that as a department or approach that in your program, of course that'd be fantastic. I don't want to sound too much like Lumberg from Office Space. If you could just do that, that would be great, right? So that is not what I want to sound like, of course. But these are just some guidelines, just some suggestions, just a visualization to show you what it might look like to try and make your assessment of student learning as powerful as possible, so that every year after the previous year, you can kind of have a sense of what could use some improvement from one year to the next. All right, thank you so much. I hope this video was very helpful. Once again, I'll show this final screen. And again, feel free to email Lynn, email myself with any questions or any, if you want to just kind of bounce something off of us and just kind of gain some insight or more information. We're very happy to talk more about it. All right, thank you so much for your dedication. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you around the halls.